Want your Void Cascade runs to look like this? I've got you covered. In this guide, I'll break down everything you need to know about solo Void Cascade, including one crucial tip most guides completely miss. But before we dive in, here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering. Timestamps are in the description, as always. Let's start with the basics of Void Cascade, specifically how to handle rotations. In squads, it's simple. You've got dedicated attackers and defenders, so Exilizer rotations are easy and predictable. But in solo Cascade, things get trickier. So the question is, when should you rotate in solo Cascade? After you purge an Exilizer, you'll notice a diamond-shaped bar appear. It starts completely full and slowly drains over time. Once that bar drops to around 1/8 remaining, it's safe to leave. Let me quickly explain how the Cascade meter works. It's the main way you can fail the mission. If there are more possessed Exilizers, the red ones, than purged ones, the meter starts to rise. Would it climb too far, and the mission fails. But if you keep more purged Exilizers active than possessed, the meter will drop. And that's exactly what you want. Now, just because an Exilizer's bar is below 1/8 doesn't always mean you should leave the room. In this example, I've got 2 purged Exilizers in my current room that haven't dropped to 1/8 yet. And now 2 possessed Exilizers have spawned in a new room. Should I rotate? No, because the Cascade meter won't rise as long as the number of purged and possessed Exilizers is equal. A simple rule of thumb for beginners is to only rotate when the next room has more possessed Exilizers than the one you're in. It's an easy way to stay safe and keep the Cascade meter under control. Later in the video, I'll go over a more advanced method, where you can actually manipulate spawn order to create a new rotation pattern, like room A to B to C. Lastly, let's go over what to do when the Cascade meter is in the red and you're about to fail the mission. In this situation, ignore all enemies, including Thrax. Your only focus should be purging every Exilizer as fast as possible. Moving on to focus schools, Madurai is by far the strongest in most scenarios, mainly because of how much it boosts your amp damage. Other schools do have niche uses, but for Cascade, Madurai is the clear winner. Just make sure to prioritize the upgrades that directly increase your amp damage. Last Gasp from Yunairu is one of the most important focus waybounds, as it allows you to self-res. One strategy during your Cascade runs is to leave Thrax in their ghost form, as only one Thrax kill is needed to self-res, and they have a massive damage vulnerability to amps. Speaking of Last Gasp, let's go over the best ways to self-revive in Cascade. The easiest situation is when there's already a Thrax in its ghost form. That's pretty much a free revive. Just enter Last Gasp and take it out with your amp. If there's a Thrax nearby, but not in ghost form, burst it down first using your weapon, then enter Last Gasp and finish off the ghost form of the Thrax. Keep in mind, you can't use your primary while downed, which is another reason why secondaries are much better in Cascade. The hardest scenario is when no Thrax are nearby. In that case, here's what to do. Soften enemies up using your secondary. As soon as you go into Last Gasp, go invisible for a few seconds. This is to take advantage of the Vengeance Waybound from Yunairu, which increases your amp damage the longer you're in Last Gasp. Then, spam your amp Saltfire and hope for the best. This method is able to consistently self-revive you, even at level cap. And one last tip before we move on. A common mistake newer Cascade players make is not triggering Eternal Onslaught correctly. If you're using the Void Flow Waybound from Zenuric, you'll need to use 3 Contamination Waves, followed by a Void Sling, to activate the Arcane. As you can see in the gameplay, this combo is what actually triggers the buff. When it comes to amps, 547 is widely considered the best in slot for Void Cascade. 147 is another solid option, but the lower fire rate makes missed shots more punishing, and can slow down Exilizer clears. Both builds use the X4X scaffold. Its Saltfire can easily down enough enemies to self-res, even at level cap. When it comes to amp arcanes, Eternal Eradicate and Eternal Onslaught are absolutely best in slot. There's really no substitute for either of them. Quick tip. Rank 9 Combat Intrinsics in Deviri gives your amp a 25% damage boost. And yes, that bonus still applies even outside of Deviri. For Operator Arcanes, Magus Cloud is best in slot for Cascade, as it massively speeds Exilizer clear times. For your second slot, you've got a few strong options. Magus Lockdown, which is great for Acolytes. Emergent Savior, which adds survivability and makes self-revives easier. Or Emergence Dissipate, an underrated pick that helps if you're running low on energy. Now for the crucial tip I wish I knew when I first started doing level cap runs. I kept running into this problem. I'd be in operator mode with full health and shields, and suddenly get kicked back into my warframe, only to instantly go down. It didn't make sense at first, until I figured out what was happening. If you transfer into operator while your warframe has a channeled or duration-based ability active, your frame becomes vulnerable, taking 10% of all incoming damage. And if your frame goes down while you're in operator mode, you'll get forced back into it with just 2 HP and no shields. Even if you're spamming rolling guard or trying to shield gate, it won't always trigger in time, and you'll go down instantly. However, not all abilities cause this. One notable exception is Nourish, which doesn't make your frame vulnerable, a big reason why many Cascade players prefer it over Roar as a subsume. Now on screen is a helpful chart showing which abilities leave you vulnerable while in operator mode. A check mark means the ability will leave your frame exposed, and there's a link to the full chart down in the description. Just keep in mind the chart isn't fully up to date with newer frames, so here's an easy way to check manually. Activate any duration or channel-based abilities, then switch to operator mode. If your frame's health bar is grayed out, that means it's invulnerable. If it's still colored, your frame is vulnerable and can still take damage. This vulnerability usually isn't a problem below level 700, but it becomes much more punishing as you get closer to level cap, especially in solo runs. So, how do you avoid this? The simplest solution is to run an invulnerable or invisible frame, like Revenant or Ash. But if you're running someone squishier, here's a few key strategies to stay alive. Purge Exilizers quickly, and always make sure your shields are full before transferring into operator mode. Activate Rolling Guard just before switching. The invulnerability window can buy you just enough extra time. Equip the Guardian mod on your companion. When your shields break, it instantly restores them. And yes, it works even while you're in operator. And for the final tip, run Shade Prime as your companion. While you're in operator mode, it can cloak your warframe and keep it hidden until you return. Let's start with how to build your frame for level cap. There are 3 key things every frame needs: survivability, energy sustain, and knockdown resistance. If you're not using someone naturally tanky like Revenant or Ash, your main survival tool will be a standard shield gating setup, using Brief Respite and catalyzing shields. To add another layer of survivability on squishier frames, Arcane Aegis is a great option. You can also replace Brief Respite by running at least one Augur mod, either on your frame or on a companion using Burst Laser Prime. This frees up your aura slot for something more flexible. For energy sustain, a great setup is Equilibrium, a sentinel weapon modded for gas damage, and the mod Synth Deconstruct. The gas clouds deal constant AoE damage, triggering Synth Deconstruct, which spawns health orbs, and thanks to Equilibrium, those get converted into energy. Arcane Energize is an alternative if you're tight on mod slots, but gives less energy per second compared to Equilibrium. And finally, for knockdown prevention. If your frame doesn't have it built in, and you don't have access to Prime Sure-Footed, the best alternative is running Worm Prime with the Negate mod. I actually prefer this setup over using Prime Sure-Footed, because it frees up my Exila slot for more parkour velocity, which I'll cover a bit later in the video. As for frame arcanes, they're pretty much entirely flexible in Cascade. Just use whatever best fits your playstyle or complements your build. When gearing up for Void Cascade, your weapons will typically fill one or more of 4 key roles: clearing Thrax units, handling trash mobs, killing acolytes, and providing utility. The strongest weapons against Thrax are usually secondaries, due to their stronger mods and arcanes. For the highest single target damage to take down Thrax quickly, the Furist and Laetum Incarnate are top tier choices. If you want a weapon that excels at clearing trash, but can still handle Thrax efficiently, The Kuva Nukor and Dual Toxicist are excellent options. For clearing trash enemies, glaives like the Falcor, Zorus, and Serrata really shine. They're also excellent for dealing with acolytes, which we'll get into next. If you're an experienced Cascade player, there's really only two ways your run can fall apart. The first is the vulnerability issue we covered earlier. The second is acolytes. They can disable your abilities, cause self-damage, and more. Any crit-based weapon with an AoE projectile is extremely effective against them, because it can bypass their damage attenuation. That said, melees are by far the strongest weapon category for acolytes, especially slam-based builds. One of my personal favorites is the Fragger Prime. As you can see, I was nearly able to one-shot the acolyte, with no damage buffs, no galvanized stacks, not even a companion equipped. Another favorite of mine is the Praetos. Now, the Praetos isn't actually top tier for acolyte damage, but it's worth mentioning because of how commonly it's used as a utility melee, mainly for its parkour velocity bonus. In many Cascade builds, your primary and secondary weapons are focused on clearing trash or dealing with Thrax, which often leaves melee as your best or only real acolyte killing option. If you need to run a non-melee option for handling acolytes, the Latron Incarnon is top tier. As you can see in the gameplay, it completely melts them, and this is without any damage buffs. And finally, utility weapons. These aren't focused on raw damage, but they play a huge role in improving your overall build. For primaries, your options are limited, but the standout is the Scourge. Its Outfire creates a 2-meter bullet attractor field on enemy heads, letting you easily charge secondary Incarnons, even if you're landing body shots. It also applies a guaranteed impact proc, which activates primary Exhilarate for bonus energy regen. Arguably the best utility weapon is the Grimoire. It can boost ability strength, duration, fire rate, and even provide energy regeneration. The trade-off? It takes up your secondary slot, which is often where your highest DPS weapons go, so fitting it into your loadout can be tricky. For melees, the obvious pick is the Praetos, for its parkour speed bonus. Another great pick is the Firax, with its Amalgam mod, giving you a 45% secondary fire rate boost. One last thing before we move on. I can't stress enough how strong secondary Fortifier is for Cascade. It gives your secondary weapon a massive damage boost to Overguard, which is usually what you'll struggle with the most. On top of that, it also grants Overguard to your frame, which is crucial for knockdown resistance, and it can even save you energy by reducing how often you need to shield gate. Companions in Cascade are fairly flexible, but there are a few standout options worth calling out. First, Worm Prime. Thanks to its Negate mod, it can block status effects, including knockdowns, which is huge if you're not running Prime Sure-Footed. It is also one of the few companions that can make use of Reinforced Bond. Another top pick is Doriga, one of the best primers, and it can also proc Archon Stretch, giving you passive energy regen. When it comes to building your companion, the top priority is reducing its recovery timer. Mods like Primed Regen and Momentous Bond are key here. They ensure your companion comes back faster after going down. Some of my go-to picks include Guardian, which instantly restores your shields when they break, giving you an extra shield gate, and Manifold Bond, which pairs great with Guardian by reducing its cooldown. No matter which companion you're running, one mod you should always slot is Tenacious Bond. It gives a flat 1.2x critical damage to your weapons, and at level cap, that kind of boost can make or break a build. When it comes to Sentinel weapons, the overall best is probably Verglass Prime with a Ribbon. It has enough crit chance for Tenacious Bond, along with high fire rate and status chance, making it excellent for priming enemies. A good alternative is Burst Laser Prime. It has innate IPS, which makes it better suited for your condition overload setups, and it can also make use of Tenacious Bond. It also supports Augur mods, which is great if you're running a build that wants to ditch Brief Respite for something more flexible. And for the final tip in this section, let's talk about something that's often overlooked, but essential: parkour velocity. In Void Cascade, you'll commonly need to rotate 300 to 400 meters across tile sets to get to the next Exilizer. If your mobility isn't high enough, your margin for error gets extremely small, and in some cases, you might not make it in time. costing you the mission. Here are my favorite ways to boost parkour velocity. Praetos, of course, as mentioned earlier. It's the go-to for movement buffs. Next up is Arcane Consequence, which gives a massive parkour velocity boost on headshot. And yes, your companion can also trigger this, if it's modded for gas damage. And one of the most underrated mods, Ice Spring, an Exilis mod that adds parkour velocity. And if you're looking for a cheaper option, Mobilize works well too. A few tips before we wrap things up with the final section. Using an operator ability like Contamination Wave right before shooting an Exilizer will trigger Eternal Eradicate, allowing you to one-shot it. It might seem like a small detail, but this can save a huge amount of time over the course of a full level cap run. Thrax enemies become extremely vulnerable while they're trying to revive themselves. This is especially useful if you're not running Madurai or have a weaker amp setup. It can be hard to tell visually when they're reviving, so I rely on the audio cue instead. Here's what it sounds like. Once you hear that, it's your signal to burst them down. For the final section of this guide, it's a bit advanced, so no worries if it's hard to follow at first, but it can seriously improve your runs. Void Cascade Exilizers always follow a fixed spawn sequence across 3 rooms. Let's call them A, B, and C. But here's the trick. You can influence how that spawn order plays out. Why would you want to do this? Let's say you start in room A. It has 4 Exilizer spawn points, but only 2 appear at first. After clearing those, you rotate to room B, where 3 more spawn. So far, so good. But instead of spawning in room C, the last 2 Exilizers show up back in room A, breaking the flow. Ideally, we want all 4 Exilizers in room A to spawn together. That way, we spend less time rotating and can retire them faster. So how do we achieve this? Once you rotate to room B and clear its spawns, do not go back to room A yet, even if more Exilizers spawn there. Instead, stay at room B until all the Exilizers clear, then go to room C and clear its spawns. Only after finishing room C, return to room A, and now, when you purge the remaining 2 Exilizers, all 4 spawns in room A will sync up for future cycles. This creates a much smoother rotation pattern. In summary, if you have out-of-order Exilizers, like room A in my earlier example, just ignore them until it's time to rotate back there. Now, this strategy does come with risk. By skipping those stray Exilizers, your cascade meter will rise faster, which can be risky, but there's a simple way to slow it down. Kill enemies inside the radius of a purged Exilizer. Not many players know this, but doing so actually lowers the meter, buying you enough time to finish your rotation safely. And that wraps up the guide. If you found it helpful, feel free to drop a like or leave a comment if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help.